Alrighty, I'm joining Stephanie here. My name is Matthew Price. I'm a soil scientist out of the Detroit Lakes office in western central Minnesota here. And yeah, we have a little soil health demonstration to kind of show infiltration and how water interacts with different management practices on the landscape.
And like Missy said, please take this time to get up and walk over here. But I guess we will be coming to you live on your screen in front of you if you don't want to get up and see what's going on. But and don't worry, you can come over here and the camera won't get you. We'll just get you on the sides. And this is kind of a nice demonstration to see. And so we're going to start out just to talk a little bit about soil function and soil health. So I'm gonna hand Matt this tube. We call this a slake tube. And lots of times when we talk about soil health, we're really wanting to focus on the continued capacity of that soil to function as a living, breathing ecosystem. And so I stop, and people are like, well, what the heck does that mean, Stephanie? And it really what we really want to think about when we talk about soil health is that our soil is alive, that the microbes that many people talked about today, they play a key role in restoring and maintaining and building soil function. And when I talk about soil function, I talk about things like the ability of water to infiltrate in the soil, the ability of a soil to cycle nutrients, the ability of the soil to have physical stability and support, or aggregate stability for us to traffic that field. And lastly, when we talk about function is that home for soil life. And so there's a lot of things when we think about soil function that sometimes we kind of just take for granted or just assume that it just happens anyway, and that it's just something that's there until we realize or we see a soil that's not functioning, when water's not soaking in, or when that water's not being released back to a plant, or we aren't cycling nutrients. And so those are some of the things that we want to think about with soil function. And so when we do this first demonstration, here, Matt, I'm going to hand that to you. Matt's got the soil in his hand. It comes from a field that is, you can pop it in there if you want. It comes from a field that's from a no-till system. So it's no disturbance on that soil, cover crops, pretty diverse crop rotation. And by pretty diverse, I mean probably 3 or 4 crops. And we're seeing some little flakes come off of that soil. But I'm going to take a sample here that came off the top of this field that came from a highly disturbed system. And if you notice when I collected this, it's not quite as round because it was pretty crusted when I picked it off that soil. So we're going to put this one in the water. And this one comes from, again, a highly disturbed tillage system. So worked in the fall, worked in the spring. Not a lot of cover on there. So again, Matt's has quite a bit of cover crops when there's not a cash crop growing in there. And let's just see what happens when I put mine in the water. And we can even come over here together if you want, Matt. What do you see? Phone went off.
So we can see the aggregate stability really working here in the health system soil, and they're holding together. They're still falling off and falling to the bottom of this tube here, but not quite as volatile as we see in our pressured and tilled system. You can see those aggregates breaking up and getting exposed to, just the water. They're not able to hold together. This is where the water pressure of infiltrating into that soil is greater than the glues and stuff holding that soil together that we see here in this health system.
Hold on a second. He just said glues. So we have glues in our soil? Let's talk about these biological glues that maybe Matt's soil has more biological glues in it than mine does. So when we talk about biological glues, one of the things that we're hitting on is the fact that a lot of our soil biology that lives in the soil, their role is to make a stable home, and the soil is their home. And so some of the work that they do is they coat soil particles with biological glues. And that is a real scientific term, and if we distill that down to what it really is, it's just ooze and slime and whatever else, worms or microbes or others are putting into the soil. But they coat those soil particles with those glues, and it helps those soil particles to be water stable. And so when it rains, we want our soils to be water stable. We want those soils to hold together and not fall apart, because when a soil falls apart, what happens is again, our particles break down, our soil particles break down, our clays go into suspension, our sands and our silts are washed off the surface and settles someplace else, and again, our clays leave, and so our soil leaves that field because those glues aren't holding that soil together. And if you notice too, even though Matt's sample here is having some pieces of soil fall off of that sample, his water is a lot different than mine. He doesn't have any clays in suspension. His biological glues are taking those particles, and even though it's maybe fallen apart a little bit, those biological glues, those soils are settling down in the bottom, and none of the clay is released, and none of it's in water solution. So we're definitely seeing a difference in how that management impacts soil function and biological glues.
And then to connect that back to life here on the Red River Valley, we look at the pieces that are coming off. They're larger aggregates that are falling, where over here we have single grain and the individual grains of the sand, silt, and clay. That makes this soil, the non-healthy soil, the tilled soil, more susceptible to that wind erosion that we see year in and year out.
Yep, and what I like to think about is the fact that we're witnessing a loss of function. That soil isn't functioning as well, so it's going into dissolution, it's breaking apart, it's running off, it's blowing away, whatever it is. But in these slake tubes, we really see what happens in that relationship with water. So we're going to set these down over here on the side, and in just a second, I'm going to actually put on the other mic because I do need hands here in a little bit. So having a handheld microphone isn't always the best option here. Let's see if I can put this one on.
Between the two?
Yes.
Difference in
So the question was, what was the soil type, and are they the same? And absolutely, yes, the soil types are the same, and that's one of the biggest things when we do these demonstrations is that we want to focus on soil types that are the same, because not all soil types are created equally. So as we look at soil health and soil function, we want to really focus on the similarities in the soil, so that when we look at the differences, we're focusing on those differences being because of management. So those two soils that we had in the slake tubes were mapped as the same soil type and literally collected across the road from each other.
Yep, and the only differences was the management that the farmer was, that the different farmers actually were doing on that field. And with that is kind of those specific soils, they match up with these as well. All these collected within the valley, and our healthy no-till system. This one is the only one that isn't in the other ones were collected in the Crookston area. This one here, about 15 miles south and east of Fargo. Still kind of on the fringe of the Red River Valley there, just before the beach ridges of like Rothsay area. But this no-till system, this field with...
You might mean that one over
or
there.
this one?
There we go, yep.
In that long-term no-till system, where they've had the ability to kind of build up that soil health and really, hopefully here, demonstrate what a healthy soil can really do for you.
Absolutely. So I have a guy in the back, and we're going to give him the cue. Just a second. Hold on, Zach. I just want to, before we get this going here, so on the back of this board here, good, Matt's putting in the rain gauge. We got one rain gauge over there, so we're going to try to make it rain about 1 inch. And on the back of the board here, I kind of wrote down what the crop was when we collected the soils. So this one here is an edible bean field, and I kind of tried to write down the management, but it was tilled and rolled, tilled, planted, rolled, and then I was able to get this sample before it was worked again this fall. So Matt and I were out there in October collecting these samples. This one here was winter wheat, and residue wasn't baled, the cereal rye was drilled into it, and in a no-till system. We're going to call this an early transitional system, so that this farmer is transitioning into more of a soil health system. One in the middle was spring wheat, harvested, chisel plowed, regrowed, field cultivate, fertilizer, field cultivate, worked at least 3 times, possibly 4 times this fall after harvest, because it was kind of clumpy, so we had to take care of the clumps now. And then we have the spring wheat field that wasn't baled, a long-term no-till system with a diverse cover crop mix, and then there was manure applied. But I think that was after we got the sample. So we don't have any manure in this sample today, so we won't have any smell when we wet it up here. And then the last one was a sugar beet field, and I actually got that after the beets were lifted, but before the field was worked. So kind of in between the rows right there, kind of like in that area in between there. So that's what these samples are looking like and kind of where they're from. And I tried to generally put down the management here, but just to try to identify the biggest thing that we want to think about when a farmer starts talking about a soil health system is like, what type of disturbance is being done out there, and how can we minimize that disturbance, and where can we fit cover crops into that system? Now, those are just two practices of when we think about soil health. There's things like adapted nutrient management. How do we fit nutrient management, or how do we apply nitrogen and other nutrients into a reduced till or no-till system? And we're not going to talk about that today, but those are big minutia that we have to start, not even minutia, those are big topics that, as we look at soil health systems, that we really want to think about and talk more seriously about. But disturbance in cover crops are two that we are really can show some physical differences here. And so with that, I'm going to, let's see here, turn on this thing, and then I'm going to ask Zach to hit our water. And it's going to take just a little bit of time to get our water over here. So as that water's coming through, it's going to kind of spurt and do some crazy stuff here a second. So so hopefully this will all go well. We set it up last night, and we had some technical difficulties because we had a water tank and a whole thing, and we fried a circuit box on our pump system, so we had to go with the hose today, is what we got going on here. All right, so we'll see, because that actually turned on really well. I'm surprised there wasn't any air blowing out of that line right now, so we might get a little bit more air here. There we go. That's what I'm expecting to see. So when we set this up for the rainfall simulator, there's a pressure gauge up there, and I always try to shoot for about 5 psi. I'd like to call this a nice rain, right? This isn't a hard driving rain per se. You know, this is a nice rain. We got a nice decent rainfall going on here. But we see some things kind of happening right away when we think about raindrop impact on soil surface. Matt, what do you see as we look down at these trays?
Well, I see the backboard, that really draws my attention, where you have that exposed soil, that those raindrop impacts are hitting that soil, and the soil is moving and hitting the back there. So we see some displacement happening there.
Absolutely. And the other thing I want to point out as you're looking at this is, I'm no dummy. I know where we are. We're in the Red River Valley, right? So when I set these up, these things are set up on little T-bars, and we can set those T-bars as flat or as hilly as we want. And I set them as low as possible, because if I came to you here in Grand Forks and I put a 4% slope on these things, you guys would think I was ridiculous, because nobody has a 4% slope, and you'd all walk away saying, oh, those poor schmucks with those hilly soil and all the erosion they have. That's not what we're trying to demonstrate here. What we want to look at is what happens even on flat soils, on flat land. And that's an important thing to think about. And it's interesting that I say flatlander, because I lived a few years in Vermont when I started with NRCS, and I was told, I grew up in southwestern Minnesota, and I was told I was a flatlander because I wasn't from Vermont. But as I get the opportunity to travel the entire state, I realized I was not a flatlander growing up in southwestern Minnesota. So we've gotten quite a bit of rain here, right? And Matt talked about the soil particles hitting that surface of the soil, those particles getting detached, right? We're starting to see ponding on our bare soil surfaces, right? This is something that, you know, is the typical process of erosion. We have raindrop impact. Loose soil particles are detached. They fly someplace else, and when they land someplace else, they plug up the pores where they land. And when they plug up the pores where they land, the water all of a sudden loses its ability to go soak into the soil. So then we start to get that typical ponding that we're seeing and pooling that we see, and then we start to see runoff. On the side here, you can even see we're even getting a little bit of splash runoff on the side as it's kind of blowing over the side here a little bit. So we're definitely having runoff happening here. Let's see here. We got that rain gauge. I think we're just under an inch.
Yeah, we're about 3/4 of an inch so far here
Absolutely.
at that 2 centimeter mark.
Yep. And so again, we're not having a hard driving rain, but we're having, we've seen rainfall events where we get an inch in 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Unfortunately, we probably talk about that occurring more often than we'd like to see. If we're only getting, what did you say? What was it? 4 inches of rain from May 1st to September 30th or something like that, and then what was it? 9 to 10. But we're getting like a quarter of it in like 10 minutes. That's not how we want our rain to come. So we're kind of seeing all of these things happen when we look at these rainfall events. Let's see here. What else do we have going on? Matt, I'm just trying to think about other things here. Oh, one of the interesting things that I think about when we talk about raindrop impact and raindrop splash is that when we have a hard driving rain, a raindrop can hit the surface of the soil at up to 20 miles an hour. So again, when we have a bare, loose soil, and those raindrops are pounding that soil surface at 20 miles an hour, we can have a lot of impact of that. Those soil particles can go flying. It's almost like little miniature bombs hitting that soil surface. And so as we put more soil cover out there and protect that soil surface, we can really reduce that raindrop impact.
We're at our inch mark here, so I think we can probably shut it off so we don't flood the place.
All right, cut it, Zach. Let's cut that off here. We'll let him turn that off. We'll run the water out, and then we'll turn the rainfall head off. We don't want to turn this off until after the rain's gone. There we go. We're starting to. There we go. There. Let's see here. I'm wondering if I should put a bucket over top of this. I feel like that's maybe feels like a little bit of a unfair thing happening here, but oh well. I don't know, this has got water in it.
Can we turn it?
Oh, hey, I know what we can do. Let's do this.
Here we go.
Did you get it? There we go. Perfect. Yeah. All right, so, oh my, that thing's kind of wily, that microphone. There.
Oh yeah, we're good. We got a bucket.
All right, so we got these rainfall buckets here. So Matt and I are gonna kind of take these out and kind of take a look at them and kind of just talk about this a little bit more in depth here. And I'm gonna get that handy dandy tarp that we have. All right. Here we go. So let's take some of these runoff buckets off and take a look at them. I'm going to just put a little sign here just so you can remember. These are the runoff buckets up in the front here. What do you got there, Matt?
Well, here I have, for the people in the back here, this was off of our sugar beet field, and then this was off of our spring wheat field. So we can see the different management systems and how much runoff we had in each respective one.
Same thing for me over here. So this was that edible bean field. That was quite a bit of runoff off that field. And then the winter wheat field that wasn't baled and had some cereal rye on it. We didn't really get anything in our runoff bucket. And then we have that one in the middle.
Similar story here with our spring wheat and then tilled field. You know, we have quite a bit of runoff in that one.
Absolutely. So the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to take this white board off. I like to refer to this as the big reveal. So we're going to set this board out of the way. So not only were we measuring runoff, but we have these infiltration buckets. And these soil trays, when they're collected, we try to limit disturbance as much as possible when we can. Collecting these soils without disturbing the soil. We have a special cutter and everything like that. And then these trays have holes in the bottom. And so we're also in this demonstration trying to measure or look at to demonstrate infiltration. So we're going to just take some of these buckets out of here and see what we got in our infiltration buckets. Oh my, I'm so sorry about this mic. I'm just not used to this thing. Either it's down here too far or it's right up in front of my mouth. All right, so on this first sample here with the edible beans, spring-tilled, planted, rolled, and then again, I collected that sample this fall after harvest before the field was worked again. We have a little bit of water in that infiltration bucket, but not a ton, but a little bit. So I'll put that one here on this back row to look at infiltration. The next one I have is that winter wheat field with the cereal rye drilled into it. And we had quite a bit of infiltration into that bucket. So I'm going to set this one kind of back in the corresponding area there.
And then kind of with that new no-tillage system, that early transitional system, here we have a long-term tillage system that's been under a no-till regimen for 15 years.
Okay. You mean
Between
a long-term no-till system?
The long-term, yes.
Okay, got it.
We can see the difference just between, those two as well.
And then what's that empty bucket you got
And then
there?
this is our sugar beet field that had some tillage on it as well.
But again, that sugar beet field, I collected that before it was worked this fall, right? I got it between the rows. And then our spring wheat field that was worked 4 times before, we got a little bit of water in there. Interesting. We'll kind of delve into that just a little bit more and see what's going on with these as we look at these soils. So the next thing that we usually do is when we talk about this is we flip these trays over. So should we just start from the outside and work our way in? Matt, you want to flip that one and I'll flip this one?
Yeah, I think that's a good start.
Because one of the things is when we do this, you look at these buckets and you're like, oh, well, this is great. But as someone who really focuses on soil function and thinks about healthy soils, I like to see what's going on in the soil. I like to dig the holes. I like to see why it's doing this or why it's not doing this. And so I'm just kind of curious of what do we got happening underneath here? And what do these soils look like underneath? And so we're just going to try to flip them right in the same area where they were collected so we can keep them. And let's talk about them. All right. So my edible bean field here, if you had looked at this tray before, on the back side, there was where a row of edible beans were. And we actually see some infiltration right there. And so we did have a little bit in this bucket, but not a ton, right? But where there was between the row, right, where there was no beans growing, it's dry, right? So roots maintained in the soil increase the ability of that soil to infiltrate water. How about on yours? What do you got there?
I think we're seeing pretty much the same story where this is pretty dry yet.
Yeah, and it looks like, man, that is just some beautiful dark soil. That's all I'm going to say with that. But yeah, it's really dry. And the other thing is one of the things I find with this is, man, it's in the middle here, because when we have our edges, we have to be careful about the edges. But some of this is just really hard packed and dry in there. But yet, when there are spots where it's kind of damp, it's greasy. And I know that I had talked to some people that this was one of the hardest years in the valley for harvesting, because we had moisture, and then all of a sudden people were trying to get into their fields and harvest, and it was just greasier than they had ever seen it. I don't know if anyone else experienced that, or that it was really wet and greasy for harvesting around here. Maybe not. And I have a theory about that, because if we think about it, how dry it was throughout the growing season, and then all of a sudden we got some late season moisture, we probably had a pretty serious compacted layer from our tillage pass, and then with a whole dry summer, that compacted layer was turned into basically a rock or a baked layer, and then we got 4 or 5 inches of rain, maybe a little bit further south than here, and that water just sat like on the top of that compacted layer like a perched water table, making harvest not very much fun for many people. All right, I'm going to dump this one out. Matt, you're going to dump that one out? I'm going to let you go first. All right. All right, so what do we got here?
Looks like we have some moisture that came through.
All the way through. And this one I'm kind of excited about. You guys have to come and look at this. This whole thing, oh my God, there's still earthworms in here. And mind you, I collected this in October. So where it's flat here across this bottom like this is all worm castings. So the worms were in the sample when I collected it, and then they've just been thriving in the sample for the last 2 months in my office on a shelf under a grow light. I'm impressed. All right. Let's do this last one. Oh my God, it's the heaviest. Did you want to flip it?
I can get it.
You know, chivalry sometimes. And also, I've been doing this a lot, so it's time for Matt to get to do this one.
What happened there?
No infiltration, right? It's bone dry, right? So we had a little bit of water, which I think it was probably preferential flow around the edges, because in these metal containers, it's hard to get full preferential flow, or to get that all sealed off, so you have that preferential flow. But so we had infiltration to maybe a quarter of an inch to a half an inch, and then that soil surface sealed up, and then none of that water soaked into the soil anymore. So we got bone dry soil. Where does, if we continue to have a dry winter, where does that leave us next spring? How do we recharge our moisture supply if the moisture can't get in? And even during the growing season, one of the things I like to think about when we do this, and we talk to people about this, and someone said going to the coffee shop and figuring things out, but I always like to think about, you go to the coffee shop and everyone's like, how much rain did you get? How much rain did you get? How much rain did you get? But how much rain did you keep? Right? And how does your management of your soil impact the ability to keep the rain that you do get when you need to have it there, right? So these are some really eye-opening things to think about when we talk about soil health and soil function. But that management of that soil plays a huge role in the ability of that soil to function properly. And I know up here in these soils, we have really highly resistive soils up here, meaning that they can take a licking and keep on ticking, right? They can be highly managed soils, but what we're starting to find out is that when soils are overmanaged with heavy tillage and other things like that, those functions that we tend to focus on when we talk about soil health, they decrease. So we see less infiltration, we see less water holding capacity. But in these high clay soils, sometimes the thing is, well, we always have water in our soils, but we don't always have water in our soils, and if we don't have the ability to infiltrate that water, that's just something that we need to think about more seriously. Anything else you want to add, Matt? Or does anybody have any questions? Because I know Melissa runs a tight ship, so I have to make sure that we keep on time with this, and I know we're getting close to our time.
You've still got a good 7 minutes at least.
Oh my gosh. Anyone have questions or thoughts, concerns, anything, issues you want to talk about?
I think that infiltration would be more no-till, where if it isn't disturbed at all, there is some disturbing when you're taking the samples, but if you'd keep the roots, the channels open all the way, there'd probably even be more infiltration in soils that are never disturbed.
Correct. Yes. So in soils that have less disturbance, we see better infiltration, and that's because those old root channels. And so whatever crops you had growing there last year and the year before, when those roots decay and decompose and go away, we're left with a macropore. A macropore that goes from the surface of the soil, or close to the surface of the soil, down into the soil profile. And that macropore is so important for rapid air and water exchange. And we need rapid air and water exchange into our soils. And so the more of those macropores that we have that allow that water to get into the soil, the better infiltration we'll have. And then the idea about holding it starts to come into the idea of our micropores, where when we have those smaller pores in our soils, that's where that water is held in that soils, in those micropores, and then slowly released back to the growing crop that you have in the field. Having that cover on the soil surface, and I'm sure there's many people here today that are trying some of these things, but having that growing cover on the surface increases trafficability. So if it is maybe a little bit wetter than you would like, or other things like that, you are still able to traffic those fields because that plant is on the surface protecting it. Those roots are in the soil growing like re-rod in concrete, helping to keep pore spaces and hold that soil structure up. And so it does increase trafficability. And I know that we talk about working our soil to increase infiltration, but we saw some infiltration on that tilled soil, but then after a certain point in time, it sealed off and we lost that infiltration. So I think that there was some work with the university that talked about a fluffy soil syndrome, that when we fluff up our soils, we might see an increased rate of infiltration at first, but then after that first heavy rainfall event, it rapidly decreases, and then we don't have good infiltration after that.
We can take some questions from the back, too.
I got one for you. What are your thoughts on high-speed discs like the quick till discs?
There's lots of thoughts. One of the things that I think as we talk about building soil health and function in our soils is that it's not one thing that we need to do, that we're talking about a whole system. So minimizing disturbance and are trying to reduce that disturbance, but then trying to also have more soil cover, more biodiversity, and more living roots. And so when I think about a speed disc, one of the physical thing that I think that happens is a speed disc does a really good job of pulverizing the very surface of our soil, turning it into this, right at the very surface with a speed disc. It turns all of that soil into the tiniest crushed up little chunks of individual particles of sand, silt, and clay. So then my concern is that a speed disc maybe increases how fast the soil seals up at the surface. But then on the other hand, when I'm thinking about building a system and working with a farmer who's maybe doing a lot more tillage than just a speed disc, if they are doing a lot of disc ripping or deep tilling, maybe a speed disc is a good way to step into a different system, right? If we're taking out that deep tillage and the only passes that we're doing is at the surface, then we are reducing that deep tillage, and we're not seeing as much of the issues with deep tillage going on. So I think there's pros and cons about it in many cases, and so I think you have to think about why you're doing that tillage pass. Is it because you're taking out deep tillage and you're going to focus more on a shallow till system, or is it like, well, I have to continue to break up this soil crust, and so I'm doing the speed disc, when one of the things that we find is as we break up our soil surface and work it up, we continue to weaken those aggregates and continue to have that problem of soil crusting. So.
Someone told me once, I think they did, that when you see an interstate being redone,
Yes?
what tool are they using out there? They probably have a big John Deere tractor pulling a disc.
Yes.
So when you think of it, is the disc a tool of compaction? That's what they want on the highway, a disc to be going down and packing it. So what's it do to our fields when you think of a tool like a disc being used?
Yeah, it's compacting, but also the biggest thing on those roads is it wants to break up all of those pieces of soil to the finest particles ever, so that they can then put a roller packer over it and pack them even tighter, so that those pieces fit together so tight that there's no air pockets in there. So
It might prepare a nice seed bed, but when you're looking at function, you're going to lose, a lot of that in that sense.
Just a quick question here. So there's a jump within this demonstration of basically no infiltration to quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
So how quickly would it go from no infiltration to quite a bit of infiltration? Is it just simply like one crop, you leave it there, and then boom, you have infiltration? Or is there like a multi-year?
you're asking the $10 million question, aren't you? Like, how much time does it take, and what, all those things like that. So I think one of the answers on that is it depends, because one of the things is in the fall after harvest, if you put a cover crop out there to protect that soil surface, we immediately see a reduction in erosion, whether that be wind erosion or water erosion. So immediately, we do see changes in our water cycle. So that does happen pretty quickly, but that doesn't necessarily, within that first year, we don't see changes in compaction layers further down that are going to restrict infiltration. We also don't, our soil structure takes a while to repair itself. And again, it's all dependent on your management and how intensive you want to try to move that process back, move that process towards building that soil health system. So I think we have farmers in here that could tell you different stories of like, well, we saw a really huge change in 2 to 3 years, or it might have taken us a little bit longer because we're on a lighter soil. But I think in that 3 to 5 year range, you can see some really significant differences especially in that soil structure. And with this resilient, resistive soil that we have, and by resistive, I mean that these high clay soils resist degradation, but when they become degraded, they need to have those tillage passes over and over again to function properly. So I think that if we give these soils a chance to recover, that we could probably see significant changes in that 3-year time frame with structure coming back. I don't know.
This one here was an example of a management system that's been 3 years, I think, no-till.
About 3, yeah.
So that's in that earlier 3 to 5 window, but you can still see the infiltration and the development just in that short period of time.
Yeah, and is there anyone in the audience that wants to comment from their own personal experiences of what they've seen using some of the either reduced till or no-till and cover crops on their fields, of how long they saw things change or not? Because I think that's one of the things, as you ask that question, I can give you a number and you're like, thanks, Stephanie, that's a freaking number. What are we going to do with that? But when it's a farmer and they're saying, well, this is my experience and this is what we did and how we did it, then that becomes a real life experience to you. So, I mean, if you're using cover crops but tilling them every fall, it's going to take a lot longer. You're pumping carbon in the system, but we're still stirring that soil and destroying that structure every time. If you're using no-till but then coming back in with a speed disc every other year or something like that, or with beets in the rotation every 4th year if we're going through some heavy disturbance, you might see that soil recover in those 3 years and then have a step back with the disturbance with sugar beets, and then you can continue to build it after that. So it kind of depends on that management of what you're doing out there. So, and hopefully, let's see here. His name is Pete. So anybody that wants to talk to Pete about what you're doing out there, you go find him, because I know there's farmers in this room that are using reduced till or no-till and cover crops, and you've adapted your nutrient management and your pest management systems, and you're having good success because I've talked to you, and I know that what you're doing is profitable, that you're excited about what you're doing, and you're having good success with it. So there's many people in the room that can speak to that.
We have a farmer back here.
All right.
Yes, my name is Cecil Duchesne from Argyle,
I know you, Cecil.
and I did a 5-year history, no-till versus tillage, with or without cover crops on 40 acres. And we'll have to say the no-till was disastrous at the end of it.
Oh, I'm really sorry to hear
A
that.
foxtail barley was unbelievable to control, and just one slight tillage would make a world of difference. So I've always heard that it works everywhere. Someone would have to yet to prove it to me. It's possible, but there are certain things that have to be managed a little bit better, and you just can't just do the same way everywhere, is my comment. Because if you're over 50% Fargo clay, it is way harder to manage.
Oh,
And the other thing has to do with the temperature difference. The ground is so much colder, it takes so much longer for it to warm up and get growing. And you guys don't address that. We only have so much time to get things growing. And the shading of the ground and the wetness and the coldness does make a difference. So, thank you.
all right. So again, depending on your system and where you are, that does make a big difference on some of those things. And the thing that Cecil was talking about too, with some of the weed management, there are things that you have to adjust in your cropping system, especially if you've been using tillage for a weed control practice. And so looking at different herbicides to use in these systems or different things like that, you definitely need to adjust that accordingly. But the thing is that as we go from the southern end of the state to the northern end of the state, we have a lot of differences in growing conditions and moisture and climate. And so there is no cookie cutter. It is trying to figure out what works on your operation and making that fit successfully for you. So again, there are a few things in there that are growing pains. The Minnesota Soil Health Coalition has a bunch of farmer mentors across the state that have experience doing a lot of these practices, and there should be mentors up in this area. I don't know if we have as many mentors as I would like, but there are people to talk to that are working on these practices and have had success with them that can help you as you transition to some of these other practices on your soils. I think that's probably all, Missy. Probably time to go. The only thing that I was going to do here to end is, again, coming back to this field and looking, I was going to flip up some of these worm castings, again, the worm poop that Missy was talking about. And I saw some worms in here earlier, but I think they all went down back into the soil profile to hide away from us as we were poking around. But if you get a chance to look at these, there's just worm castings all over through here and just wormholes everywhere. And again, those pore spaces that come from that soil life play such a key role in helping to aerate those soils and get, yeah, there we go. There's a couple of our worms. There we go. All right, so we'll leave these out for a little while, but I know that we have to have them cleaned up by 1:30 today for the next meeting that's here, so. Yeah, and that was a comment here, was just a question on the nutrient loss on this waters that ran off. And I guess to answer that, absolutely, right? If we've applied our fertilizers to that soil, even if we've mixed it in, we still have a concentration of nutrients in the top 2 to 3 inches of our soil profile. So any of that soil that's running off, those nutrients are bound to those soil particles and are leaving with that field. Are leaving with that soil when it leaves the field, and so we lose those nutrients every time we have a runoff event. Or again, we didn't show it here today, but even a wind erosion event, we're losing any of those nutrients in that soil and our organic matter. Thank you for your time today.